Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writers Drinking Coffee. This is a podcast of a bunch of writers sitting around drinking tasty beverages and opining about writing, publishing, and the whole creative process. We do not censor ourselves, so consider us PG-13. Your host writers today are Chaz Brenchley and Karen Brenchley, David Welsh, John Schmidt, and me, Jeannie Warner. This is episode 133, an interview with David Pedersen. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much, Jeannie. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm delighted to have you because you are another writer in one of my favorite genres of detective fiction. How did you get started in this delicious, delightful drama, especially historic detective fiction?
Oh, well, it's interesting you asked me that because I was just going over that myself for something else I'm working on. The famous question, how did you get started? I think when I was a kid, not that long ago, I grew up, I was an awkward child and kind of clumsy, and we moved around a lot. I didn't have a lot of friends. So I entertained myself in front of the television, as many children do. And back in the 60s and 70s, I watched a lot of old movies, 1930s, 1940s stuff. Loved the Thin Man series, loved all the old Agatha Christie films, loved all the Humphrey Bogart stuff. So, and then I discovered, wow, these movies were based on books and I can learn even more. So then I started devouring the books and I was enthralled. I mean, it was just fascinating. So then I grew up, got a little older, I was about 18, and I thought, I was on my high school literary team, and I was on the high school magazine staff, and I did a lot of poetry writing, a lot of short stories, but I thought, I'd like to try writing a book. And you would think, naturally, that I would go back to my heroes and write a murder mystery. But instead, I was enthralled with a little show called Dynasty at the time.
Oh, boy. We all remember Dynasty.
Yeah, exactly. Soap Opera City. And that's the kind of book I wrote the first time around. And it was pretty bad. So that I never did anything with that. I think it's still sitting on a closet shelf somewhere. And
well, wait a second here. I was going to say success teaches us nothing. What did you learn from the failure?
What I learned from the failure, not to write soap operas. Stay away from that. Let the professionals do that. So yeah, I went back to my heroes, Agatha Christie and Dashiell Hammett, and decided to try my hand at writing a murder mystery. And that's when I did the first draft of my very first book, which is Death Comes Darkly. And I set it in 1947 just because I do love that time period. I mean, I didn't grow up in the 40s, but I grew up with that time period, watching it on the TV and all those old movies. I love the clothes, I love the fashion, I love the manners, cars, pretty much everything about it. So,
well, plus I love the name Heath Barrington. I mean, that's so perfectly noir.
Isn't that regal? I know. And I actually had a contest among my readers to give him a middle name. So, because I'd never given him a middle name before. So that was kind of fun.
Oh, you're going to disclose it?
Alexander.
Okay.
But see, this is where I see you got into your dynasty roots with that name.
Yes, exactly. There's always a little bit of that. So.
And he has a love interest of a cop named Alan Keyes. So yes, I enjoy that you sort of bring out what it must have been like to be a gay police officer and investigator in 1940, effectively solve crime while kind of keeping your personal life on the down low.
Yeah, that plays into pretty much every book in some fashion or another. I think it has to. And it also becomes a part of the plot in some of the books. For example, he gets in one of the books, he gets blackmailed by somebody who discovers his secret, his and Alan's secret. And the blackmailer ends up dead, as often happens in my case. So then what? So that all the gay storyline always plays into the books in some way or another. He's always trying to keep it hidden or a secret from somebody.
Now you place this all in Milwaukee, and poor Milwaukee has had kind of an exercise in the last couple of years. How does the Milwaukee of then contrast with the Milwaukee of now.
But quick before you answer that, David.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell me where Milwaukee is? Because I don't know.
It's in Wisconsin, and it's on one of the Great Lakes.
Oh, okay.
Do you know Chicago, Illinois?
I'm aware. I'm familiar with these places. Yeah.
So Chicago is about an hour and a half south of Milwaukee.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
So, and that whole area has just been had so much adventure. So,
Yes, it has. Milwaukee in the 40s was definitely a smaller town, a little more industrial, not as cleaned up as it's gotten over the years. I wasn't born in Milwaukee, but that's where I spent most of my adult life until moving to Arizona. So I knew Milwaukee, and I felt, why set my stories in a city that I don't know? Whereas at least this way, I've already got some background, and I know some of the historic buildings, and I know some of the history. So, to be honest, it just saved me a little research.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was going to ask about research because 1940s, that's a historical novel. So how much research did you still have to do despite knowing your way around the city?
Surprisingly, a lot. I didn't know for sure what wages were back then, or even what lots of people did for a living, or what kinds of cars they drove, or where the streetcars ran, what the streetcar map was, what the hotels were, all that kind of stuff. How did people pay for hotels? Speaking of Chicago, my book Death Checks In is set in Chicago. And for that, I had to research how people paid. I mean, they didn't have credit cards. So what did they do when they checked into a hotel, So research is huge in all my books. I try to get all the details correct. I'm sure I make mistakes, but I try my best not to.
I think a lot of times if you get the guns and cars right, a lot of your readers will forgive you.
On the other hand, my first book was set in Newcastle, which was the city where I lived. So I didn't need, and it was set contemporaneously. So I didn't need to do that much research because I'd lived there a long time and I knew it well. For purposes of plot, I had to move a footbridge from where it actually was to where I wanted it. I ended up having an argument with a friend of mine because he said he loved the way you could follow the book around the city. And I said, well, actually, no, you can't, because I move things, I change things here and there. And he said, no, you can. I absolutely do. And I mentioned the footbridge that I had moved. And he said, I walk across that footbridge every day. And he was confusing what I'd actually written with what he knew. And readers do that all the time. It's lovely.
That sounds like a good person to bounce things off of.
Oh, he always was, yeah.
And I noticed you made it to book 6 and then wrote a prequel called Death's Prelude.
Yes.
Because you just had how did he become the Heath Barrington that he is today, and just need, or was that a special request from a reader, or how did you come to write a prequel?
A little bit all of that, Jeannie. I'd always had in the back of my mind to put the details in one of the books as to how Heath ended up being a gay police detective. I mean, it wasn't exactly real common back then. And then I did get a couple questions from readers like, what's his backstory? And I thought, well, it'd be fun to do a prequel and go all the way back 10 years to 1937. And I set the book on the original Queen Mary, which was launched in 1936. Talk about research. Holy cow. I know that ship pretty well now.
Isn't she in Los Angeles being a restaurant or something these days?
Well, yeah, she's in Long Beach, right? Yeah, near Los Angeles. And right now she's a bit of a mess.
Did you visit?
I did. Yeah, actually I visited twice. Right now I understand she's closed and her future is a little uncertain.
You go to Catalina Island, you pass her to see the whole broadside of the ship.
Right. Not to brag, but there's a lovely picture of me in steampunk garb on the deck of the ship with the Queen Mary. So
of course there is.
We do occasionally throw steampunk conventions there, and they did a murder mystery on board that too. So I thought that was pretty awesome.
Oh, that's exciting.
So David, following up on this fact that there are 6 consecutive novels and then a prequel. Would you advise new readers to start with new readers who like to read chronologically as a rule? Would you advise them to start with the prequel or with the first novel?
Actually, I usually leave it up to them, but if they ask outright, I will say the prequel, I think, is a good place to start just because it does give you the backstory, but they're all written independently, so you don't necessarily have to read them in order.
Okay, thank you.
So now that you've moved to Arizona, are you going to keep your detective in Milwaukee, or is he suddenly going to move to Arizona, which is a totally different place then? Or what are you thinking?
That's a good question. Actually, I'm putting Heath and Alan aside for a while, and I have started a whole new series and a new detective. This one is a private detective. He's not a police detective, and he doesn't have a boyfriend. He's kind of footloose and fancy free. He's a little bit older. In the first book, which is Murder on Monte Vista, which is a pretty big street in Phoenix. In that first book, he's actually turning 50. And he's dealing with all the angst of that as well as trying to solve a murder. So totally changing things up. And there will be a second book as well. And I'm actually working on a third in that series. So we'll see what happens.
That's great.
I noticed in your preview, you say it's a little bit of the Sherlock Holmes study in Scarlet. The room is locked, no way in or out, only Henry and Mason inside. Are you drawing a little bit from that, or did you go your own direction at all?
I think I went pretty much my own direction.
You even answer that without spoilers. What kind of a question is that?
I am a dedicated Sherlock lover, and I'm obliged to say, the locked room.
Right.
Doesn't have to tell how he solves it, but I'm very interested in how he approaches it.
Yeah, that was an interesting puzzle to put together. And how did the person end up being dead in the locked room with only two people in it? And surely my detective had to be the number one suspect. But I'll tell you right now, without really, it's not a spoiler, he didn't do it. So,
Gosh, really?
Well, here's why I'm asking. For people that want to be plotting these things, and they say, you start with a situation, or did you have this is what'll happen, and you worked backwards? Where do you start when you are starting even just to stand alone or one in a series? Where do you begin in your plot?
Yeah, when I start writing a book, I always try to come up with the who, what, where, when, why, and how. My who has got to be who gets murdered, who did it, and who solves the crime. And of course, the who solves the crime is pretty easy for me. In the new series, it's Detective Mason Adler. In the old series, it was Heath Barrington. Who gets murdered, that's obviously a key place to start. and who did it. And then once I figure that out, I figure out the what's going to take place leading up to the murder, and the where is the murder going to take place? Where is the setting going to be? So, for example, like in the Queen Mary book, the first half of the book takes place on the Queen Mary. She sails to England. The second half of the book takes place in an English estate in England. My third book that I'm working on right now is going to take place in Palm Springs, California. So, yeah, the setting, I always feel like the setting is another character. So I figure out all the who, what, where, when, why, how stuff, why did the person kill them? Why did each of the suspects have a motive? What was their motive? And I try to only have 5 or 6 suspects if I can. I don't want to overwhelm the reader, but I don't want to make it like, there's only 2 suspects. It's got to be A or B. So once I get all that figured out, then I start piecing it all together like a puzzle. So I usually write the ending of the book kind of first, and then I fill in sections as we go.
There's a school of thought that you give the reader the choice A and B, but then it turns out to be C, and it all makes sense in retrospect.
True. I try not to throw in too many any things like that where the reader gets to the end and they're like, wait a minute, it was the bellboy all along? You never even mentioned that except once on page 2.
That's the trick of writing. That's the trick of belonging to that particular school of thought is you have to make the reader say, oh, of course. You can't make him say, what? You cheated.
Exactly. And I have read books like that, and it is frustrating. So yeah, I definitely try to stay away from that, but I definitely try not to make it too obvious.
So you plan everything out in advance?
I do, as much as I
Yeah.
can.
How much of an outline do you actually write before you start the book?
My outlines are usually pretty slim. I mean, it's basically just character names. I always have a character database that I keep track of. The who, what, where, why, when, and how. It does occasionally change too as I go along.
Yeah. Has a book ever surprised you? I mean, you're going along and you suddenly realize, no, it wasn't him that killed him. It had to be her. Obviously, why didn't I see that before?
Yeah, absolutely. I have changed the direction of the book a couple of times, of almost all the books. So it's interesting that you asked that.
Yeah, it's a fun process. I mean, I'm totally the other end of the spectrum from you. I don't plan or plot anything in advance. Give me a title in the first line and I'm off.
That's awesome.
Well, it's an edgier way to work because I have no idea where I'm going. And it's always possible that I may run up a blank alley and go nowhere at all. But the other question I wanted to ask. So you said half a book in England.
Yes.
Did you run it by an English person to sort of check on the Englishness of it all?
I did actually. I have two friends that live in St. Albans.
Oh.
So they were my source over there. And then, of course, all my usual sources, Google, the library, all that good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but it is convenient having an English person to ask.
She says, glancing in my direction.
Definitely.
Here's a philosophical question. It's sort of for the room in general, but David, you start us off. Your people that get killed, do you prefer to have them innocent bystanders, involved but not guilty, or rotten to the core secretly? Or a mix?
Yeah, most of the time, my victims, I personally take the direction that I don't want them to be too likable. I don't spend a whole lot of time with them while they were alive on the page, because I don't want my readers to feel too much sympathy for them. But that's changed a little bit over the years too. I mean, in the first book, Mr. Darkly, it's no secret that he's the person that ends up getting killed. I don't think he's a pretty unlikable person, and I kind of carried that forward in a lot of the books. Mm-hmm. But there are some that they're not rotten to the core. They may have a bad side, but they're more like a normal person. Everybody has good and bad to them. So.
Okay, so I mean, carrying this on, is the fact that they're unlikable as a rule connected to the crime that carries them off? I mean, are they baddies involved in criminal activities?
It depends on the book.
Okay.
So definitely the fact that they're unlikable gives the suspects a lot more motive.
Right, there's always that,
yeah. Absolutely. So mainly though, I know like when I used to watch old movies and somebody would die, if it was somebody I really liked, because I'm such a sensitive, stupid slob, I would get so upset. So I try to stay away from that for my readers. I try to soften the blow, as it were.
That's very kind of you. Unusually kind in an author.
At some point, which I will not tell you the title because this is a spoiler, but I actually deliberately killed a very nice person in it, and I felt really bad about it. But he needed to die, and
that fades in time, Karen.
What? Yeah,
said that will fade in time.
Well, yeah, I know, but not everybody is you. So thank God. The world would be full of too many powerhouses in that case.
Yeah, come on, the world would be half empty. Jeannie would have murdered them.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. Good thing you're in Arizona, David.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
In the words of Tom Stopper, the good end unhappily, the bad end unluckily, and that's what tragedy means.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom Stoppard is a wise man.
So as you go through and you've moved your murder down, are you dedicated? Or you think this is your niche forever? Or you are going to expand into other things? Have you ever covered real life? Do you use real life examples in your books?
I've always toyed with the idea of not going back to my soap opera roots, but going to some other type of a story. And in fact, I have started a few. I've actually got all kinds of stuff in the works, as you all probably do too. I'll start one thing, put it down, and move on to another thing. But murder mysteries is definitely a genre that I have a lot of fun with because it's totally the opposite of who I am in real life. In real life, I have trouble killing mosquitoes, so it's kind of my outlet. So yeah, I have a lot of fun with it. And I will use real life examples. For one of my books coming out, I use I'm inspired by a real life crime that actually happened. And that's actually mentioned in the book itself. So I definitely will use real life examples too. And I'm talking with myself about writing something more contemporary too, giving that a go.
So you think instead of current noir, I'm not even sure what current noir would look like. So anybody, this kind of groove, besides just looking outside in the noir zeitgeist that we're going through right now, what does a current detective noir look like?
I am not sure that there is a current school of noir. The work I see is mostly serial killers or traditional crime solving. That element that we all love that is noir. I'm not sure. I mean, there's a lovely publisher called Zombie Needs Brains who is currently reading stories for, I think, an anthology of future noir. And that's a thing. That's a thing that in science fiction you see quite a lot of noir elements carried forward. But contemporary noir, I mean, if it's out there, I'm sorry, I have missed it.
What is the most recent noir of which you were aware? When did it stop, if you will?
Go on, John.
I'd like to interject that we need to distinguish a little bit from the stylistically noir, in which case I would say you're looking perhaps at David Lynch or Memento.
Cowboy Bebop.
These are movies.
No,
I was talking about books.
Yeah, and Cowboy Bebop isn't noir.
Oh, bite your tongue.
It's jolly.
See,
Yeah,
or I would actually posit The Wire. But to a degree, although they're sun-drenched, the detective solving crimes against a backdrop of corruption, besides Woodward and Bernstein, could be Travis McGee. The definition of noir needs to be decided before you say where it's gone, because it's gone everywhere.
That's fine. That's fun. I like that. We could talk about noir in a different episode. That might be fun.
Well, here's the bomb question that I do not have an answer to, and I don't even want to consider. Is The Dark Knight, the most recent version, noir?
Interesting.
Right. So let's put that into a separate episode and go back to men with style and a writer with style, both in, ranging from Palm Springs to jolly old England.
Does he wear a snap brim fedora, David? We need to know this.
Oh, he does. He definitely does.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I think can we all agree that it must have a fedora?
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm a snap brim fedora. Does this mean that if you twitch it, it snaps? I mean, I know what they look like, but I want to know why it's called snap.
We'll look that up and put it in the liner notes.
Excellent.
So
my new detective also wears a straw boater because it is Arizona. So
I was going to say, is he in Oxford? Boaters are very much associated with Eton and Oxbridge in the UK.
That is true.
So what is your process? How have you, because I see that you have the Murder on the Monte Vista coming March this next year. Yeah. You've clearly stayed busy through the time of cholera. Tell us, how do you keep yourself motivated and on track to do this? Tell all of the would-be authors struggling how you managed it. What'd you do?
Just write. Write as much as you can every day. I mean, it's kind of cliche, but it works for me. I sit down in my office and hopefully my husband's not lurking about making noise or trying to distract me.
They do. They do.
Right. Yeah. You know, no matter what it is, no matter how many times they say, okay, I'm going to work. I've got to work on this. It's, you know, it's like, where did you put the laundry detergent? I'm like, whatever. So, but yeah, I mean, I just write. And as I mentioned earlier, I've got several projects in the work that I'm working on, and I'll bounce from one to the other. And ideas pop into my head.
Do you enjoy that, being able to put one thing down and pick another up, and so progress several things more slowly rather than totally focusing on one until it's done?
For me, I do. I'm not a deadline-driven kind of guy. I like to just get them done as much as possible. So yeah, I enjoy having different projects, and I think we talked briefly somewhere along the line about my floor plans, and I also do that. I'm a frustrated architect, so a lot of my inspiration. What's that?
I'm not sure we've had a frustrated architect before.
Well, a lot of my inspiration also comes from my drawing. So sometimes I'll actually do the drawing before I even do the book. So
I do. You haven't talked about drawings. What do you draw?
I draw all the locations from my books, actually. So, for example, the one set in England, it's set at the fictional estate of a lord. So it's called Heatherwick. And I designed the entire estate, the whole floor plan, the exterior, the basement kitchen, the back entrance, the whole bit.
That's magnificent. I mean, do you sort of publish these on a website or something for your eager fans?
I do. They're on my website, most of them anyway. But I'll even do things that aren't necessarily on the page of the book. They're just mentioned.
Sure.
Basically, like I said, I'm a frustrated architect, and I think it's a lot of fun. For the book that's set in Chicago, which is Death Checks In, I designed an entire 1940s hotel, which took considerable time, but it's a lot of fun.
And useful.
Yes, extremely useful because, you know, as you all know, you have to know where your characters are moving, where they're going to have it make sense on the page.
I had this lovely thing because all my early books were contemporary. So if a character wanted to move from Newcastle to Carlisle, you know, I knew how to do that. I knew how long it would take in a car, how long it would take on a train, how long it would take in a bus. But then I was writing my first fantasy, and I needed to know how far 8 strong men could carry a teenage girl in a wooden litter across a semi-desert landscape. And
I need to know that too.
Exactly. It's really important. And you know, I mean, how far they could get in a day. And I could not find this even on the interwebs. So I may have mentioned my frustration on LiveJournal, it was then. And bless them, 8 strong men built a litter, tossed one of their daughters into it, trudged around a field for an hour and multiplied up. And the answer we think is 12 to 15 miles is comfortable. Any more than that would be pushing it.
Where can I find 8 strong men to
carry? I was astonished. I had no idea they were doing this until it was done, and they sent me photographs and everything.
Well, this answers the question of, do we imagine ourselves carrying the palanquin or riding in it? And I think every single one of us on this podcast imagined ourselves on the palanquin.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
That's beautiful. And you've been a Lambda finalist a couple times. Congratulations.
Thank you.
We love the Lammies.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you won one. So.
Yes. I may have one on the shelf, but we love them.
Yes.
We love them all.
And what do you, let's see, are you working on a sequel to the next one coming out, or what is your current project?
I'm hard at work finishing the second book in Mason Adler's series, trying to get it done so I can get it submitted. And I've also in the works, because as I mentioned, I like to do multiple things at once. I'm also working on a third book in that series. So that's the one that's set in Palm Springs. The second one is... You
actually work on 2 novels contemporaneously.
I do.
Okay, that's bonkers. I'm not sure we've had anyone who does that before either. So what's the process that takes your books from finished draft to publication?
Once the draft is finished and I actually submit it, then it goes to my publisher and they hopefully pick it up. And then, of course, it's all the usual standard details. We do the cover. They ask me what I want on the cover, and we go from there. And then it's the blurb, which is my least favorite thing to write.
Oh, hell yes. No, you're
Isn't it
right.
awful?
But you write a great blurb.
He does write a great blurb. I was going to say, 2 thumbs up for all the blurbs on your webpage. Those are really good.
Oh, thank you. But, I get help with those, so it's not all me. I must confess. I'll write a blurb and I'll submit it to my publisher, and they'll come back and they're like, yeah, that's pretty good, but what if we say this in addition? So they'll tweak my blurbs.
Of course they will. That's what publishers are for. I mean, they should write the blurbs themselves. There used to be a job, in the UK at least, of being the publisher's blurb writer. Certainly at Penguin, there was a guy who was employed simply to read every book they were publishing and write the blurb for it.
There's a Penguin blurber?
Yes.
All right, now I'm picturing a penguin sitting at a typewriter.
I truly am sitting here imagining Penguin blurber. What's your name? Just call me Pengy. Everybody does.
And he's nicely dressed, so there you go.
Very snappily dressed.
Yes.
David, we will put links to your book and all the topics we've mentioned on our website, which is www.writersdrinkingcoffee.com. Thank you so much for visiting with us today.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
You've been listening to Writers Drinking Coffee, a labor of love and enthusiasm put together by the hosts. Our main web support magic is Deirdre Schween, and our sound engineer and backup web spider is David Welsh. Our intro music is Pretty Maid Milking a Cow, and our exit music is Breakfast with a Morning Person, both by Michael Engberg. You can hear more from Michael Engberg on manyhatsmusic.com. Our podcast sponsor is whoever makes your favorite wine and coffee. And hey, thanks for listening.